the leak is disappointing. I wouldn't say I'm necessarily shocked. When you're involved in a big conflict with a great many nations, parties involved, regrettably, you are occasionally going to get leaks like this. It doesn't make it any better, but the likelihood is increased. As always, there'll be other things going on that we're unsighted about quite appropriately. But based on what we understand, what are the concerns? Well, the concerns firstly are around British national deployments that may or may not be taking place on the ground in Ukraine. And it is not for another nation to talk about those, compromise those. So that is concerning, and that'll be a matter for Britain and Germany to discuss. I think at a much broader level, I think NATO nations need to be very, very careful, because all the way through, NATO as an alliance has been working a close tightrope to support Ukraine to the maximum degree possible without triggering disproportionate responses from President Putin. And my judgment is that the NATO have done that very well. But this sort of leak, no matter what the truth of what's gone on, what's really happening on the ground, plays right into President Putin's hands. And of course, it comes only a week after President Macron mooted the idea that it is not inconceivable that NATO nations might put troops onto the ground in Ukraine, which was discounted by other nations. But it all feeds into President Putin and his regime are very, very smart at using the information domain. And this gives ammunition to President Putin. One of the things that President Putin and the Russians hate is being made to look incompetent. Think back to their attack on Salisbury, the Novichok attack on Salisbury. When the British investigation happened, the Russians were made to look genuinely incompetent, and that's embarrassing. Whenever the Russians are hit, the Crimea bridge is hit, it makes the Russians look incompetent, and Putin really, really doesn't like that. It compromises his image of strength, but it kind of works both ways. When NATO nations appear to demonstrate poor tradecraft, that again gives ammunition to President Putin, but it's not good. It is not good for the NATO alliance. It's not good for Germany as a nation that we know are looking to increase their defense spending. That is in our collective interest that Germany do that. But it doesn't look good when this sort of what appears to be a very amateurish mistake gets made. And I reiterate once again, we don't know for certain what's gone on behind the scenes, and as always with these things, there's more than meets the eye. But based on what we know, it looks like an amateurish security leak. I mean, it's down, very much down to the German government, the German Ministry of Defense. What often happens with these security leaks is that I would expect there to be a full investigation. At one level, that's a national investigation by the Germans. I think because this has a international flavour to it, the United Kingdom will be interested in the results of that investigation, as indeed will NATO. And you conduct these investigations to try to ensure they don't happen again, learn the lessons, and critically, other nations, including the United Kingdom, should be cautious of throwing stones, because all nations are vulnerable to this sort of human error, this sort of leak. And I would hope very much that if there is an investigation in Germany, that the lessons of it are shared widely across the NATO alliance, so all nations can learn from it. I mean, at the most extreme version, some kind of sanction could be taken against him, but yeah, I mean, that's clear German matter. I can't speculate on the likelihood or otherwise from that being the case. Going into, we're now entering the third year of the war, the mood feels very different. On the ground, at a tactical level, low-level tactical level, for the first time really since very early in the war, the Russians just seem to have the advantage. You know, they've taken Advika. The Ukrainians gave that terrain up. The kind of tactical moves are coming from the Russians, and that is, of course, a cause for concern for the Ukrainians. Um, but it's not all about that. Elsewhere, the Ukrainians still are doing really impressive things. They continue to place the Russian Black Sea Fleet at jeopardy. They're mounting a very impressive maritime campaign. They're continuing to strike deep into Russia. So elsewhere, the Ukrainians are doing well, but as down on the ground, the Ukrainians appear to have ceded a bit of an advantage. What comes next is difficult because we're still paying the price, or the Ukrainians are paying the price for NATO nations, frankly, dilly-dallying through last winter. So too long was spent discussing: do we provide tanks? Don't we provide tanks? Do we provide F-16s? Don't we provide F-16s? And we're still paying the price for that. Um, so you know, President Zelensky has been much more measured than last year about what his intentions are. But they've got to do something through this spring and summer to retake some kind of initiative back off the Russians. Exactly what that's going to look like, I think time will tell. So on the election, as you say, I mean, it's not really an election at all. It's a sham process. So I think we can be pretty clear about the outcome of that. Can I conceive a situation where NATO forces are involved directly in Ukraine? I mean, never say never. It is not completely inconceivable. I think it is highly unlikely. I think that because the reality is Ukraine are not a NATO member, and so Article 5 does not apply. And I mean, I think just NATO as an alliance would be very, very cautious of going that step. And I wonder what the publics of NATO nations would feel about that. So I wouldn't say it's absolutely inconceivable, but I think it's highly unlikely that NATO forces would be formally committed. You know, discreet advice, trading support, that sort of thing on a kind of undeclared basis. And I have no inside knowledge about what they are or are not doing, but that sort of thing would not be, is not unusual. But formal troops on the ground, not inconceivable. And indeed, I think there's an argument for keeping Putin guessing a little bit in that regard, but I think it's highly unlikely.